Kind of a long answer to a relatively short question, but I guess sometimes that's the way that it goes. Mark Morris checking in to say, good morning, coming in from Marquette, Michigan. How about that for him? Where there is still gnashing of teeth and great despair over the whooping we put on the Moore Award winners from Michigan. I guess that may have been what the other commenter was referencing because Mark brought that up. I'm guessing up there in Marquette, Michigan, I don't know precisely where Marquette is, but I'm guessing you have maybe less humidity. I know a lot of people love the golf in Michigan this time of year. You get up there for that, what's it called? The Upper Peninsula, is that the part of Michigan everybody likes? You get up there, you get some 70-something degree temperatures, you get lower humidity right there on some of those lakes, and you get a really nice experience. So I'm guessing, if I know Mark pretty well, I'm guessing he's in a very nice part of Michigan, whatever he's doing. That's, if I'm guessing, that's probably what I imagine. Big Daddy says, can SEC Media Day be watched on podcast or live? The SEC Network is actually going to have, once again, very big coverage of this. They're going to do their SEC This Morning show. That's normally a radio show, but they're going to make it, I think, a TV show all next week with Doring and Peter Burns, who we like. And then, obviously, the Feinbaum show. And they're going to do whatever their sort of studio show is, SEC Now or whatever. They're going to do that during the day there, too. So, basically, SEC Network next week, and this is not a commercial because they're not paying me a dime to say this, but it is just factually true. They're going to have wall-to-wall TV coverage all next week. And, of course, DawgNation wall-to-wall coverage there as well. But in terms of the live TV coverage, SEC Network going to have a lot of that. William Perry checks in to say, go Dogs. Always happy to have William here. Jay Shipe says, I have the opportunity to attend SEC Media Days this year. Is it really the madhouse it appears to be? So, here's the thing about SEC Media Days. I think pre-pandemic, they were trying to build this into something really big. I think they wanted to make it an even bigger madhouse than it had ever been before. And when the pandemic happened, all of a sudden you didn't have one in 2020. And then in 2021, last year, it was kind of a more stripped down version of what it had been in the past. So I guess I kind of don't know what we're going to get in regards to that here this year. The big thing over in Hoover has always been the hotel lobby and the fact that you get a lot of fans that kind of congregate in that lobby, make a lot of noise when the coaches walk in. And it is, there's a certain sort of hysterical nature to it that I think the SEC kind of likes. I sort of enjoy that. Some of y'all know I'm a little bit of a carnival barker by nature, so making these sort of big sideshow type events is kind of fun for me anyway. And so I sort of like that aspect of SEC Media Days. And I think for a while, I think they were trying to push it bigger and bigger and bigger. Maybe no one told me this. This is just my interpretation of it. I think the template they were striving for. Are you familiar with Super Bowl Media Day, where now they have that in the stadium and people can buy tickets and you can have a big crowd there to watch the players essentially sit at a podium and do what I'm doing right now, which is talking to a microphone. I think that's what they were kind of trying to build SEC Media Days kind of into. As I said before, that's just my own personal interpretation of it. And the pandemic kind of greatly changed that. So when we go to Atlanta next week at the College Football Hall of Fame, I'm actually a little unsure of how hysterical it's actually going to be and how much of that's kind of allowed to go on. I'm as curious about that as anyone. But back in the old days in Hoover, when that hotel lobby kind of got going, it was pretty big. Now, it wasn't a large space that was crazy, but there were a lot of people sometimes in that space. And, frankly, sometimes it's the coaches and players, coaches more often than players, who are some of the ones acting the craziest from time to time. Greg Dog checks in to say summer blues, go Braves, but can't wait for Oregon. I do get that. For some people, baseball, golf, everything else is just sort of a small consolation, sort of a small meal snack to tide you over for what you really love, which is college football. We certainly understand that, although it was certainly nice to see Braves get back to their winning ways up in the nation's capital last night. Brad Honnett says we're going to have to pay the players if they charge for ticks. Yeah, pretty soon you may have an appearance fee for some of these players going to SEC Media Days. Colorado Ski Dog, 83 grad, checking in from San Antonio, Texas. So good to have Colorado Ski Dog checking in here today. Wayne Hunter checking in there as well. Brian Whitehead said the SEC Network coverage last year was pretty entertaining, especially when host tried on Big JD Sport Coat. Yeah, that was pretty good. Also, we had Peter Burns from the SEC Network on the show last summer. He told a great story about seeing a relaxed version of Kirby Smart during SEC Media Days last year as kind of a signal that, hey, maybe Georgia really is kind of settling in here as a true national championship contender. It's one of the things that gave Peter, and he told us this on the show last year, it's one of the things that gave him the confidence to go out and pick Georgia to win the national championship. So maybe sometimes reading between the lines with some of the stuff that you see on TV, maybe it does end up being an indicator of what's going to happen during the season. As Brian points out, last year, kind of a version of that. Richard D says, is Dylan Lonergan being revisited or a no-go due to being a dual sport athlete? Well, I mean, it's kind of been sort of suggested to me that for a team like Georgia, Lonergan, who has justified interest in having, a justifiable reason to have a lot of interest in baseball. He's a very good baseball player. But as maybe like a program like Georgia, their lone quarterback commit, that interest in baseball might just be a little too much to make him be kind of the centerpiece of a class. Whereas at a place like Alabama, this is no disrespect to Lonergan, who I do think has the potential of being a very good quarterback, but he's going to have to make up his mind at some point. Are you a baseball player or are you a quarterback? Going to be hard to be both. But at a place like Alabama, because they already have the commitment from a guy like Eli Holstein, I think they were a little bit more sort of interested in maybe taking that commitment. I think for a lot of schools, maybe Georgia included, the will he, won't he aspect of Lonergan in baseball might have been, a little bit of a turnoff there. I think Sam Horn from Collins Hill, who went to Missouri, maybe a little bit of a version of that from the 2022 class there as well. Keith Finney, thanks for the kind words. Mark Moore says that Marquette's on Lake Superior. The Green Bay fans are pumped about Quay and the other dogs. That's good to hear, Mark. I'm glad to hear that and glad you're enjoying yourself there for sure. Wayne Hunter says vacation the Colorado Rockies and back home just in time to kick off the season. Can't wait. That's awesome, Wayne. What a great time. I've never kind of done a full vacation like in one of those sort of pleasant climate places. Like a few years ago, it's actually been more than a few years ago now, my wife and I spent a weekend in Boston. This was like in New England, in that kind of surrounding area. This was like right before our first child was born. It was kind of our sort of swan song to being adults without kids. Early August, we went to Red Sox game, visited some of the Maine coast, a little bit of the New Hampshire coast, and also into like Providence, Rhode Island, kind of visited some of that harbor, area. And it was just such an eye-opening experience to me because it was like 70 degrees. It was like 68 degrees in New Hampshire, and all these like northern people were just like slathered in sunscreen and just engulfing the beach, right? It's like, to them this was like summer, and to me it's like I need a coat. Being a true son of the South, that was not exactly beach weather to me. But it was really pleasant. Like it was like being in air conditioning the entire time you were there. And I realized it's maybe not always that way in Boston, New England. But for that particular weekend, that's a lot of what the weather was. Like really pleasant, low 70s, high 60s type weather. And it's really nice. And like I don't mind the heat. I love going to the beach. A lot of y'all know that. I just like that, but it's hot. In Florida or coastal Georgia this time of year, it's just really hot. And I take the heat well, take the sun well, doesn't bother me too much. But when you go somewhere like the Colorado, the Rocky Mountain region, or up in Michigan, or over in New England, you have a more pleasant sort of low 70s type summer vacation. I'm guessing that's probably pretty nice. Keith Finney says back-to-back. What do y'all think? I think that sounds like a really good idea. Scott Harris says, how big could SEC Media Days get in Hoover? It's better in Atlanta. Yeah, and that's another thing too, Scott, where obviously it has a chance to be a very big event here in Atlanta. And I think the goal also was at one point in time to kind of travel this thing around some, kind of like the NFL draft, visit city to city now. And that's another thing that I don't really quite know how much of that's still on tap because of what happened with the pandemic a couple of years ago. But at one point in time, I think it was the goal to sort of travel around. There are obviously a lot of TV markets now, big cities in the SEC footprint, and sort of traveling around to some of these places was one of those things that they wanted to do there for a while. Hemingway says College Game Day is going to be week 1 at Ohio State, Notre Dame. Of course, I feel like they should be in Atlanta. Yeah, I get where you're coming from on that. But listen, that Notre Dame Ohio State game's got a lot of TV interest, so it's probably easy to understand why they might be going there for that. Reggie Elkins checking in from St. John Bay. Well, that's nice, Reggie. Good for you. Glad to have you on board here, checking in from what is essentially paradise. So I'm happy to have you spending some time with us while you're enjoying just a beautiful, beautiful area there, and that's a great thing to be able to see. All right, we are incredibly late, so let's start the show. We're also pretty relaxed. It's Saturday. It should say this is almost too relaxed if I'm not sure what day it is. It's actually Friday. Tomorrow is Saturday. But we're looking ahead to Saturday because that is when 4-star linebacker Troy Bowles makes his college decision. And it starts off quite an interesting stretch for UGA We're going to cover that on the show today. Connor Riley, pinch hitting for Jeff Sintel, will help us do that as we go on the road to Assisted by AAA. I saw an interesting list recently involving a lot of Georgia players, and this is a fascinating scenario for the upcoming season, and so we'll try to figure out what all of that means here over the course of our time together. We'll do a little bit of a preview of SEC Media Days. We'll talk a little bit more about the other SEC teams that were in remember the blue chip ratio? We kind of talked about that the other day. And we kind of looked at Georgia and the sort of teams just above it. We'll look at the rest of the SEC on that list here in a moment, because I do think there's kind of an interesting thing to be said about some of the teams there on that list, and we will do that then. And who knows what else. We're just going to cover all the bases here. We're really glad to have you with us. Happy Friday to you. Getting ready for a great weekend. It's DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I'm going to begin today by telling you something you already know. It is about to get very busy when it comes to UGA recruiting, and a lot of the intrigue we've had as it relates to the 2023 recruiting class is going to play out before our eyes here over the course of the next 7 days. And obviously the big domino to fall on that's going to happen tomorrow, as I'm recording this on a Friday, when four-star linebacker Troy Bowles gets ready to make his announcement. At this point in time, it almost feels like we've kind of covered the Bowles thing in every way that we can, just based on what we've said as of late, which is that Glenn Schumann, who really cleans house in recruiting and obviously takes a lot of those linebackers and really turns them into outstanding players on the field, has already done big work for the class of 2023, bringing in C.J. Allen, who we really like as a terrific player, recently adding Raylan Wilson, a big flip away from Michigan, one of the guys that I think is going to stand to be one of the most exciting players in this Georgia 2023 class, regardless of who else gets added after that. And now you get a chance to add Troy Bowles potentially in the mix there tomorrow there as well. Obviously, we'll have to wait and see how this plays out. And certainly Georgia fans are hoping for good news when it comes to Bowles. But for the most part, the stakes on all this are all really well established. Georgia fans have had this guy circled for quite some time. And, you know, it's an example of the strength of Georgia. And admittedly, listen, not everything related to this 2023 class has sort of felt like business as usual. There are, you know, some guys who maybe Georgia fans want who maybe are going to slip away, or there's some, you know, position groups you'd like to see Georgia dominating with, and maybe right now, for whatever reason, at least at the moment, as of press time, as the fancy folks like to say, that's not necessarily the case. But at linebacker, everything's all fine, seemingly. Everything's all kind of, you know, the way it's supposed to be, because it certainly seems like there are some very big prospect at the linebacker spot who, you know, are going to have lots of national attention, are going to have lots of offers, lots of interest, and maybe there's been some mutual interest on their part in Georgia there as well. But for the most part, you know, no disrespect to Tony Rojas, who just committed to Penn State, or Whit Weeks, who just committed to LSU. For the most part, Georgia has had laser focus locked in on Allen, who it's already gotten, Wilson, who it's already gotten, and now hoping for Troy Bowles on Saturday. You can watch the film, and Jeff Sintel has shared this at DawgNation.com plenty of times, and you can see what makes him a really good player. But I also am going to kind of lean in here for a moment on, I think, the biggest cliche of them all sometimes in football, but cliches oftentimes become cliche for a reason. You know, the idea that Troy Bowles, being the son of Todd Bowles, the Bucs coach, you know, that idea of, hey, you want that son of a coach. You know, that's one of those things that we just sort of naturally assume that any player who's son of a coach is somehow going to be a really smart player on the field. Now, we also sometimes see in life that, sometimes, you know, in certain fields, hey, the apple sometimes falls far from the tree. But in the case of Troy Bowles, I don't believe that's the case. Certainly, he seems to play with the same kind of mentality you would expect a son of a coach to play. And that's one of the things I think makes him really exciting. This is a guy that Georgia fans clearly want, and tomorrow the wait will be over in finding out if UGA gets him. I saw where On3 Sports recently had a quote from as Raylan Wilson was last week, this is Troy Bowles right now, about kind of what he likes about Georgia and compared to his other finalists. He says, Coach Schumann and the whole coaching staff are cool people, and Coach Smart and everyone there always keeps it real with me. That's Troy Bowles talking about what Glenn Schumann, Kirby Smart, and the rest of this coaching staff brings to the table for him and his decision. This would obviously be a gigantic win if Georgia's able to get it. Later on in today's show, I'm going to bounce this off Connor Riley. Connor pinch hitting for Jeff Sintel. Jeff normally joins us here on a Friday. Jeff's actually starting his vacation, going to be gone for a few days. So I'm going to ask Connor how he feels, that Georgia fans should feel, going into this decision for Troy Bowles there on Saturday. This is one of the biggest dominoes to fall for that class of 2023, and the decision date for Bowles now just a day away. We're looking forward to that. And what's cool about Troy Bowles here is it actually starts quite a week for UGA, because shortly after Bowles does what he does, all of a sudden there on the heels of that, coming up on Tuesday, you've got Jamal Jarrett. Very impressive defensive tackle, a guy who's been, I think, pitched by Georgia to step in and become the next Jordan Davis. And listen, I know that's a mouthful, and that's the kind of praise I'm probably not willing to so quickly give to anybody, but in terms of the personality, maybe, the love for the game, the approach to the recruiting, the approach to making himself the best version of himself, at least from a personality standpoint, Jamal Jarrett probably is already a little bit like Jordan Davis. Some of the intangible stuff, some of the feel that he gives off. In that respect, Jarrett, who's going to decide shortly after Bowles goes tomorrow, at least from that standpoint, from a personality standpoint, he probably is already a little bit like Jordan Davis. And obviously we'll find out wherever he makes his college decision, if he comes to Georgia, obviously making his choice on Tuesday. You'll find out eventually what kind of player he becomes, and does he do anything to rival all the on-field accomplishments of Jordan Davis. We'll have to wait for a while on that. But it's easy to understand why the persona that Jarrett gives off is already kind of drawing some Jordan Davis comparisons. And as you know, what was really cool when Jarrett took his official visit to Georgia going back a little earlier this summer, it just so happens, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, that Jordan Davis was sort of back on the Georgia campus when Jamal Jarrett was there. And as a way of kind of pitching not just Jarrett, but a lot of guys who were on campus that weekend about come here and be the next version of the great Georgia defense that's existed in the past, the presence of Davis while Jamal was taking his official visit, apparently that played a very big role in what made Jamal Jarrett's official visit to UGA so enjoyable. In fact, Jamal Jarrett visited with our Jeff Sintel recently to talk about that and a whole lot more. This is what Jamal Jarrett said about the time that he spent with Jordan Davis. I think this is really cool.
Yeah, so pretty much they were just aiming for, let's not tell you how great you could be, just look at how great you could be. And just having the players come in, that was pretty much them telling us how great we could be. Jordan Davis had a one-on-one with me and my family and was like, you know what to do if you want to be great. Look at the history, look at the people that played before me, look at the people that played with me. He was like, pretty much, come be a dog. So it was awesome, man.
Would it be possible to like Jordan Davis any more than you already do? I mean, for a guy that gave Georgia so much on the field, to think that he's delivering that kind of articulate message to a future recruit, to a current recruit, future player maybe, of, hey, follow my footsteps, come here and be a dog, come here and live into the legacy that we've created here at the University of Georgia. That's just incredible stuff for Jordan Davis. And I'm guessing if you're a UGA fan, that kind of attempt to pass the baton, I'm guessing that probably really works on you, really works on me. Certainly, it's a nice thing to think about. And it sort of speaks into whether it be Jamal Jarrett maybe on Tuesday or Troy Bowles maybe on Saturday, go along the other great linebackers that Georgia's already brought in, the great defensive backs that it brought in for the class of 2022, those terrific edge rushers that Georgia also brought in for the previous cycle there as well. That the real belief that I have is, as historic as the Georgia defense was in 2021, and you've heard me say this before, as historic as that defense was, the best defense in Georgia's program history up to that point, I truly believe it won't be the best defense that Georgia ever has. That eventually, over the course of the long haul, the legacy established by guys like Jordan Davis will attract players to the program because they now have a proof of concept for what they themselves are able to do. And you hear Jamal Jarrett apparently pretty swayed by that. We'll find out on Tuesday exactly how much he's swayed. For a guy like Troy Bowles, who's been attempted to be sort of wooed by Ohio State and all the big programs that are out there, somehow Georgia's able to maintain that connection through all of that, the same way that it did with Reverend Wilson, flipping him away from Michigan, or, C.J. Allen there as well, that eventually Georgia is going to build a defense in some future year. Maybe it's not 2022, but maybe it's a couple of years after that, whenever else, that eventually Georgia's going to build a defense. Eventually, it's actually even better than 2021 defense was, because people want to come be a part of the next version of that 2021 defense. And you see some example of some of that momentum maybe starting to build. Maybe not always as fast as some Georgia fans wanted to, but building nonetheless. Now, all of that leads to this, because while you're interested in what Bowles does tomorrow and you're curious about Jamal Jarrett early next week, you start fast forwarding a week from now, really 8 days from now, to next Saturday. That's when 5-star safety Janelle Aguero gets ready to make his decision. And I don't know that I think Aguero's a better player than Bowles, or, it's hard to predict even if how you might compare to a Jamal Jarrett or really anybody. When it comes to individual evaluations, they're always a little tricky to make. But there is something very interesting about Aguero's decision that I don't know that necessarily every other recruiting story this year is going to have the same level of juice around it. First of all, it's very much an of-the-moment type decision in that it seems like Janelle Aguero is like a lot of guys in this cycle where he's been sort of thought to sort of long be connected to a school. In Aguero's case, I think most of the pretty plugged in folks on the internet would tell you, hey, Georgia's had a really good relationship for quite some time, and yet here we are kind of in the late stage of that recruitment. It seems like Miami's coming on pretty strong. There's been some social media stuff from Aguero about Miami as of late, and you wonder, the same way that Miami has kind of gotten in pretty quickly and pretty aggressively with some prospects near their end of their decision time, is potentially the same thing going down with Aguero here. And it takes you back to a story that Jeff Sintel had with him going back to last month, where at that particular time, there was one school for Aguero that was seemingly standing out among the rest. He didn't reveal what school that it was, but did lay out pretty clearly that he had in his mind a clear leader at the time, even if he wasn't willing to express who that was. I think we have this. Let me show you this from Jeff Sintel, Janelle Aguero at DawgNation.com. He says, I don't know how to say it, but I'm already getting that way of kind of leaning toward it a little bit with that one school, meaning there's one school for me that's out in front. He says, there is definitely one school that's a couple of little inches or a step ahead here. That's what Janelle Aguero said when he visited Georgia in June, when he spoke to Jeff Sintel shortly after that. And if you're a Georgia fan, I think at the time when Aguero said that, you probably felt comfortable that Georgia was that school. And maybe even after all these weeks, maybe you still feel that it's comfortable with that and Aguero, who's going to make his decision next Saturday. But when you see some of the Miami chatter that's out there, when you watch how quickly Miami made up grounds with other recruits over the course of this cycle, presumably using NIL to do so, I think it does add a level of mystery to the Aguero decision that maybe not all of these decisions here over the course of this month are necessarily going to have. And probably the stakes for Aguero next Saturday get even higher on the basis of the fact that, listen, for some of us, I don't make any bones about this. Some of y'all know that I'm a Georgia fan, but specifically one of the things that my bias probably shows up more than anything is when it comes to guys in state. I just like really good players who come to the state of Georgia, admittedly have a little bit of a blind spot when it comes to that. And a guy like Caleb Downs, one of those guys, another safety that you'd love to have in this class. And admittedly, you've probably never quite gotten, if you're a UGA fan who really wants Downs, you've probably never quite gotten the very favorable, positive news reports on Downs that you'd like to get. So given the fact that, I don't know that Georgia's ever really been called the clear leader for Downs, or even, in any way, shape, or form, that kind of label attached to its recruitment of Downs, that makes the Aguero thing even more important as you head towards 2 Saturdays from now. But you'll have to wait and see how that plays out then. The best way to feel good about what eventually goes down with Aguero is to develop some momentum and build some of that heading towards that. And that's what Troy Bowles gives you a chance to do tomorrow. A great player in his own right and a great conclusion to what has been a very strong stretch of linebacker recruiting for the Dogs. Jamal Jarrett tucked in between that on Tuesday, leading into what Aguero may do the following Saturday. A lot of Georgia fans were told to buckle up and get ready for a wild July. It is here, and it is as advertised. Big players making big decisions, and stay close to DawgNation for a reaction to all of it. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and glad to have you with us. No matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., starting at 9:45 on our First and 15, DawgNation.com, and the DawgNation app. 10 a.m. after that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. We're on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 Ref. We're available as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. All kinds of great places to have the show. Really glad to have you with us as a part of it. And a big thanks to our friends at Kroger for making it all possible there as well. And Kroger's got a great thing going on. How about Kroger Chef Jr.? That's on tap for you here. I love telling you about Kroger Chef Jr. because I think, first of all, it's just kids like to cook. If you can show them how to cook and show them how to easy for me to say, prepare meals, they really enjoy that. And if you want them to eat healthier, sometimes getting them involved in preparing the food is a great way to do that. That's what Kroger Chef Jr. gives you a chance to do. It's this weekend, and also another opportunity to do that coming up on July 30th there as well at select Kroger locations. Now, here's what this is. It's a 30-minute class where your child's going to receive an apron and patch, a chef's hat, a recipe card and box, a spatula. Who doesn't need a good spatula in their lives? It's all just $7, and the dish being made this month is a veggie dip. So if you want to learn how to do that, if your kid wants to learn how to do that, $7 per child. You can check out KrogerChefJr.com for a lot more on that. Of course, the word junior in this case is spelled out Junior. KrogerChefJr.com. I'll also tell you this. I'm very happy to have Kroger as well, a part of our DawgNation Duck Hunt tailgate as we get ready for Georgia, Oregon coming up on September 3rd. And a lot of you know this. We are at capacity for our tickets, but there is a waiting list. And this is one of those things where if you'll get on the waiting list now, and I haven't gotten an update on this in a couple of days, but I believe this is still true, that if you'll get on the waiting list for this now, I think you have a pretty good chance of having some space cleared for you. Now, eventually, it's just going to be a full-on cutoff. We can't add any more. But for now, we are taking names to our waiting list. If you go to DawgNation.com, you can find out more about that. And it's going to be a great event. Your ticket includes a T-shirt, which is going to be one of the best we've ever had. Your drink tickets for that day. Obviously, the food there, too. And it could not be closer to the stadium, right there in the Home Depot backyard, next to Mercedes-Benz Stadium. An amazing tailgate experience from 12 to 3 p.m. there that day. DawgNation.com for more info. And as I mentioned, big thanks to Kroger, along with the Finnish Long Drink, R.S. Andrews, 7-6 Apparel, and Merriweather and Tharp for being such a big part of all of that. All right, we're going to keep the recruiting talk going here in a moment. We'll welcome in Connor Riley today, who's pinch hitting for Jeff Santel. Jeff on vacation, so we'll do a kind of a version of On the Road, assisted by AAA, with Connor Riley, who's not on the road. He's actually sitting here producing in studio with us here today, but that'll be good because Connor's obviously watching the Troy Bulls decision very closely and everything else that's about to unfold with UGA recruiting. So we'll talk about a lot of that with Connor here coming up in a moment. Before that, though, I want to go around the doghouse, and I saw where Pro Football Focus, and it seems like we mentioned PFF a lot this time of year, although not everybody loves what they bring to the table. But I saw where they had their list of top 25 tight ends in college football for the upcoming season. And did you know that Georgia has 3 of the top 14? They got the number 1 tight end in Brock Bowers. According to Pro Football Focus, they have the number 3 tight end in Eric Gilbert. They have the number 14 tight end in Darnell Washington. Now, here's what's amazing. Some of you obviously follow the sport pretty closely. Some tight ends are a lot more sort of famous than others. I mean, everybody right now, other than the Mackey Award voters, but everybody right now knows how good Brock Bowers is. But like Michael Mayer from Notre Dame, that's a really good player. And Eric Gilbert's ranked 1 spot behind him. Like, imagine this on a team that already has Brock Bowers. Georgia also has a tight end of a similar level to like a Michael Mayer at Notre Dame. That's a pretty big statement. Darnell Washington, who according to Pro Football Focus is Georgia's 3rd best tight end. He's still ahead of Jaleel Billingsley on this list, who's now at Texas after having been at Alabama before that. Jaheim Bell from South Carolina, he's 5th, and that's a big target in that South Carolina offense. That may be one of the top targets for Spencer Rattler this season, but Eric Gilbert's ranked ahead of him. Like, that is, I mean, by now everybody knows this. It's been well documented, but that is a staggering level of talent in one position group. And obviously it speaks to what Todd Hartley's been able to do there. We understand that. But when you see it kind of listed out in terms of here are the very best in the country and 3 of the 14 best are all at Georgia, what an amazing thing. Now, like on the flip side of this, it also presents the challenge of, well, how do you keep everybody happy? How do you get everybody involved? Some of you know Kirby Smart the other day was on the that show called Crane and Company, makes a visit there. And he talked about the challenge of, hey, getting a lot of tight ends involved, only 1 football to go around, only a room at times for a couple of guys in the field. How do you do all of that? And Kirby was fairly candid in discussing the challenge of keeping a lot of guys involved at a very crowded position group. This was Kirby.
Well, the first key is keeping them all healthy, right? Yeah. I mean, Darnell, this time last year with foot injury, Areek's had some injuries in his past. Brock had a shoulder surgery. So, first thing you got to do to have depth, you got to have depth so that you can compete and have guys really fight for that playing time. But those 3 guys are really good. We think Oscar Delp's had a great spring practice. Rylan Godey's coming off some injuries, and then Brett Seither had his best spring. a young man that we signed a couple years ago. So we really like that room. What I really like is the competition within that room. We're trying to find roles on special teams so they can go out and help there as well and steal some more snaps, because we lost 3 linebackers that got drafted at inside backer. It's rare to find 3 inside backers that got drafted in the 3rd round or better. We're losing a lot of special team snaps out of those guys. So those tight ends got to cover it up. But we'll get the ball to those guys and spread it around, because I think Coach Munkin and Coach Hartley's staff, they do a great job of getting the ball to tight end.
I'm saying this half kiddingly, most actually 100% kiddingly, but poor Todd Hartley's breaking his back, bringing all these 5-star recruits, and Kirby Smart goes in an interview and says, hey, we may not be able to get you some touches in offense, but we can get you some special team snaps. You want to cover some kicks? We'll let you do that. Like, if that doesn't make the job of a recruiter that much more difficult, hey, listen, I don't know how many touches we can get you in offense, but you can get you some special team snaps. I say that kiddingly, but that was one of the things that kind of popped in my mind on that. But, more seriously, though, I mean, when you see a list like this laid out, and even if you don't like Pro Football Focus, even if that's not your cup of tea, you already know that Georgia's really talented here, and Kirby is correct to bring up an Oscar Delp there in terms of, in the category of maybe how good a Darnell Washington could be, how good an Eric Gilbert can be, how good a Brock Bowers already is, and I think that's a worthy addition to that. And I guess like the sort of summation of all this for me is, earlier this week we talked about breakout stars from Georgia. That's one of those like really big, bold print phrases you see a lot this time of year. Breakout stars. And once again, I guess it was Pro Football Focus that had their sort of label of breakouts at UGA. And I said, listen, Arian Smith, who was mentioned, Jamon Dumas-Johnson, I think those are sort of very optimistic appraisals, and maybe that is indeed the case if how that plays out, but maybe a little optimistic in my mind of exactly how good they're going to be in terms of like sort of like true star status for this season for different reasons. You can check out the show earlier this week as an example of that. But if you're saying to me, well, BA, who is a potential true breakout? Who is the kind of guy that really is potentially by the end of the season a household name? Eric Gilbert would be on my list. He really would be. And I've told you all summer long, our buddy Terrence Edwards obviously knows Eric very well. We've kind of joked about this. Like, I have really tried to be very slow in terms of like building too much hype for Gilbert, because I want to have respect for the journey that he's been on, a journey that took him away from football and has now brought him back to the sport. And that's a big, that's a big journey that he's been taking, right? There's a lot to that. But when you see him listed as the 3rd best tight end, even if it's mostly sort of a hopeful appraisal by people who use calculators for a living, when you see him on a list like this and who he's ahead of and who he's connected to, and how close he even is in terms of how Brock Bowers is perceived to be on your list of guys who could truly be breakout and truly be sensational, well-known household type players by the time the season's done, I think Eric Gilbert definitely belongs on that list. I do. And whether you like Pro Football Focus or not, they are certainly a reminder of just how true that might be. That is Around the Doghouse. This is DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We're happy to have all of you with us. And as we said before, a lot of the energy here right now around recruiting decisions, big ones on tap for Saturday with Troy Bowles and the next few days after that, and the possibility there's some surprises in store for the month of July there too. Let's cover all of that right now. We call it On the Road, assisted by AAA. We normally do it with Jeff Sintel. Happy to have Connor Riley in his place here today.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
All right, so busy time for UGA recruiting, and a great person to have speak to us today. Obviously, Jeff on vacation, as we said, but Connor's following all this stuff very, very closely, and that includes tomorrow during the day when linebacker Troy Bowles gets ready to make his decision. Connor, how do you handicap this race here at the moment? It seems like Georgia's been in a pretty good spot here. Maybe some of that for me is just based on the fact that I assume all linebackers want to play in a defense that's helped populate the NFL so well in recent years. But how do you look at the current race for Bowles here, maybe where Georgia stands in all of that?
Yeah, I think Georgia feels very confident about what it can potentially do on Saturday. A decision I think now expected sometime in the afternoon from 4-star linebacker Troy Bowles, a guy that a lot of people really like. I believe he's the number 2 ranked overall linebacker in the 247 composite rankings, and a guy that, for 99% of the schools out there would be a crown jewel, a big recruiting win. And for Georgia, it's just going to be business as usual in the event that they land him. And I do think that he commits to Georgia tomorrow. And, this is a question we'll eventually have to ask Kirby Smart come signing day. But Troy Bowles' father is Todd Bowles, a longtime NFL coach and currently the head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I'd be interested on what his response would be if asked the question, you have the son of an NFL head coach, a guy who knows what it takes to get to the NFL level, the level of commitment and development required to get there. What do you think it says about Bowles that he ended up picking this Georgia program and came to Georgia to better, obviously, his chances of reaching the NFL? And I think that, more so than adding another four-star linebacker, perhaps says a lot about this commitment and the overall sort of health of this Georgia program, more so than landing yet another top 100 overall prospect that happens to play linebacker.
And what's kind of ironic here is that earlier this offseason, I had actually kind of focused on some things that Todd Bowles had said about the linebacker position related to a completely different topic, not anything to do with the fact that Troy Bowles might go to Georgia, but Todd Bowles was talking about how they want to use Devin White and that defense there and how they want to kind of turn him loose to sort of be, I forget exactly what the statement was, but, along the lines of just like letting him be the guy kind of playing in space there and kind of using that as an example of how valuable a great inside linebacker can be. And, to think that Bowles as an NFL coach, a guy who has some thoughtful ideas about how linebackers should be used, coincidentally has himself a son, a great linebacker who might come to Georgia. It is kind of a cool, I don't know, the tie-ins to all this are just really cool. And I agree with you. Almost the same way that had you gotten the Arch Manning commitment, it gave you kind of an interesting boost from the Manning family, kind of a famous last name. On a much smaller level here, the Bowles connection could be really good for UGA. I mean, it's quite a validation. I think you want to eat at a restaurant that chefs eat at, and I think that you might want to be a part of a program that football coaches send their sons to play.
Yeah, I think with Bowles, again, you just saw in this last NFL draft cycle 3 Georgia linebackers go in the top 100 overall picks. I think that makes it very easy to sell yourself 2 top linebacker prospects out there, because not only are you going to get the development to where you're going to be placed in a spot where you can contribute and play right away at the NFL level, but you're not going to be asked to do everything, and you're allowed to develop at your own pace. Nakobe Dean was a guy that came in and starred right away. Star might be too big of a role, but he played a role for Georgia right away. Whereas a guy like Channing Tindall never started a game in his time at Georgia, and they both ended up developing into really impactful players, guys who made key plays in that national championship game and are now drafted into the NFL level. And so I know every recruit, Troy Bowles no different, envisions himself making an early impact, but I think with what Georgia has shown, especially at that linebacker position, hey, everyone develops differently, and if your timeline takes a little bit longer for you to develop into a real player for this team, that's A-okay, because at the end of the day, Georgia has shown that it can still get players to that final endpoint, even if it does happen to take a few of them a little bit longer.
I have to admit here, if it is business as usual tomorrow and Georgia does win the Troy Bowles decision, I certainly hope that it does. Here's the other thing I hope, Connor. I hope Georgia fans haven't gotten to the point where it's passé to beat Ohio State for a linebacker, to go out there and beat major programs like that for a player of this caliber. I think it's hard to celebrate all these wins, and Georgia's obviously collected so many of them in recent years. It's sort of hard to get super excited about all of them. I do get that. But flipping Raylan Wilson from Michigan's a really big deal. Michigan probably needs him a lot more than Georgia does, and yet Georgia still got him. If Georgia goes out there and wins with Bowles tomorrow in comparison to the sort of elite level of competition that's chasing him, we ought to celebrate that as a big win. And I don't really know what would count as adequate celebration to me. I'm not really quite so sure. We have to have a ticker tape parade. I don't really know what the adequate level of celebration is. But being, genuinely excited about it, I think that's the right response if you are a Georgia fan here.
Right, and I'll say this as well. There are some rumblings out there that Justice Haynes may be nearing a decision in terms of his commitment. And, Georgia's obviously recruited the running back position very well. It shouldn't come as a surprise that given he is the son of one of the more important players in Georgia history, or at least someone who made one of the more important plays in Georgia's history, that he ends up at Georgia. The fact that he's a top 50 player, and the same applies for Bowles here, especially given that linebacker position and how well Georgia has developed it, Like that's still a huge win. And I do think, we've seen this, because I was sort of curious about like AJ Harris, for example, when he committed. Georgia's had so much recruiting success. There was still a lot of chest thumping and a lot of happiness, at least that I saw on social media, that Georgia's able to go in there and land a 5-star cornerback, especially at the expense of Florida. And so I do think that recruiting, it's in part, a buy-in, and because Kirby Smart speaks so eloquently on the importance of recruiting, that because there's this buy-in, the fans also understand how important recruiting is. And so maybe, in a Mark Richt era, if they were recruiting at this level, maybe wouldn't be seen with the same sort of chest thumping and celebratory nature that I think we're going to see this weekend. But because Kirby Smart so eloquently speaks on the importance of recruiting, has made it point blank clear it's the most important thing he does as a coach. I think because that exists, you're going to see celebrations for beating out Ohio State and Oklahoma, two teams that are playoff contenders, and you're probably going to see in a playoff sooner rather than later. Beating out of Florida, who's important to keep down, and Alabama as well out there. So winning those types of recruiting battles, I think still carries the day because of the way Kirby Smart so passionately speaks about the importance of recruiting.
You mentioned Justice Haynes. What sense do you get, and this may just be a sort of a educated guess on both of our parts, but do you think we'll eventually get a sort of date for an announcement, or do you think he just sort of drops an announcement out of the the clear blue sky? And I guess beyond Haynes, what are some other potential surprises that we could see erupt here in addition to sort of the established dates we already know about?
Yeah, so I do think that there's not going to be an announced date. I think Haynes is just going to drop likely a commitment video, and we will know then, and it would not surprise me if it happens before the end of July. I think the other one that I'm watching interestingly, because it seems there's now so much information out there, and I don't believe this is his fault. It's just he's a high priority target, and you look at the schools that he's recruiting, but what sort of happens and unfurls with Caleb Downs? Because obviously I think everyone knows at this point there is sort of the expectation that he might end up at Alabama based on some crystal balls that came in over the weekend. And he had some tweets, obviously, about it, pushing back against the notion that he had made a decision. And in thinking and hearing you talk about it earlier on the show, it reminds me a little bit of the Gilbert recruitment with him coming out of high school.
It really
does. The sense that, there was obviously some level of interest there. He kept showing up to Georgia, camps. He showed up at the famous I believe Texas A&M game where it rained about the whole first quarter, and he was covered in a poncho, and he still had a big smile on his face. But it never seemed like Georgia was able to gain any real traction there during his recruitment, and he was always sort of looking to go elsewhere. And in following Downs, who I've said before, I think you have to get at least one of Aguero or Caleb Downs in this class, just given some of the struggles, or not struggles, but some of the concerns that exist at the safety position, especially in this season. And I mean, I had said before, I thought Caleb Downs was a more important get than Arch Manning would have been for Georgia.
Yeah.
And so what he ends up doing, and maybe even more the timeline, because I think maybe the longer this goes for Georgia, the longer he goes undecided, the longer he isn't committed to somewhere, I think that might actually end up helping out Georgia in that sense, because it seems like right now there's a lot of smoke around Alabama. But if he were that sure on going to Alabama, Downs seems like the kind of kid that would go ahead and get that commitment out of the way.
That's a good point.
And the fact that he hasn't might show that he is still deliberating and thinking about it. And I think that might bode well for Georgia when that decision is eventually made.
I think it's a really good point what you're bringing up there. Maybe at least some hope for Georgia fans. And I'll give some context here in that I'm not that interested in anyone's individual evaluation of any individual player. I kind of find that to be a little bit of a coin flip from time to time about who's going to be great and who's going to be not. But I will tell you this. When it comes to Caleb Downs, I've talked to a lot of people across the state about him. I've never heard anyone hesitate to say they think he's a great player. I've never heard anyone even equivocate in that whatsoever. You compared him in terms of importance to an Arch Manning, and I think the reason why that, would have been true, still is true, even if he goes somewhere else, is that the level of quickly offered praise that he gets. I mean, people just really like his game. They really like what he brings to the table. He is as clean a sheet as you get in terms of the evaluation of what he is as a player. And I think that's one of the reasons why those conversations around him carry so much weight, is because of how unanimous the evaluations of him seem to be.
Yeah, I've talked with Jeff Sentell about him, and he says Caleb Downs is the best high school safety he's ever seen. And, Jeff saw Richard LeCount, he saw Lewis Cine. He's seen those guys, and those guys be successful, all SEC-level players. And for Downs to get that kind of treatment, again, comes from, he's the son of a college coach. His older brother is one of the best receivers in the country at North Carolina. A big playmaker there for a power, a high-ranking team in 7A at Mill Creek High School. So you see that there. And at the same point in time, we can also transition here to a little bit of talking about Janelle Aguero, who's going to announce on the 23rd. There are a lot of people out there that like his tape a lot. I know he's currently in Massachusetts. That's where he is from. Spent the last 2 years at IMG Academy. And so that, to me, answers some of the questions that you might have about the competition level and does a lot of the things that Caleb Downs does as well. And so I think for Georgia, landing either one of those, for me, is the most important thing that they can do in this recruiting class because it shores up a need. It shows, hey, we had a position of need. In this case, it's safety. And we went up against every school. We went up against Ohio State, Alabama, Miami, Florida, big-time programs that are able to recruit at a high level. And we were at least able to get one of the clear top two guys. And so if you're able to get one of Aguero and Downs, that's a win in of itself. The idea that you're going to get both of them might be a little bit of a pipe dream, but if you get one of them, that is exactly what you needed to do at the safety position in this class, and so help shore up a position that has been a position of need for Georgia.
I want to ask you more about Aguero in a moment, but you also touched on something about Downs that I think is really interesting, and I've noticed, I don't really have a good answer for this. There are some things that I noticed that I don't really have maybe an explanation for, but you compared him to what Eric Gilbert was when he was coming out of Marietta High School, one of those guys that just seemed really intent on leaving the state. Now, that didn't last for him. He's now back playing at UGA, where I believe he should have been the entire time. But nonetheless, that was the journey he had to go on there. But it just sort of seems like we see this from time to time. And oftentimes it's sort of an Atlanta area, suburban player, whether it be Marietta or, Mill Creek or, somewhere like that, where it's just a guy who doesn't seem to have, like the way in which, Nye Carr talks about Georgia, way down there in like Moultrie. Like, that's a guy that loves UGA. Like, these Atlanta area guys, they just don't always talk that way about UGA. And I don't know if there's a comp with this with other, big-time programs, other big-time states. Georgia obviously dominates recruiting, and, it's done pretty well in its own state there as well. But, boy, it seems like there's one every year, it seems like anyway, from that sort of Atlanta area who just wants to chart his own path and just kind of wants to go somewhere else. And I'm not quite so sure what you do about that, but it seems like we see that story replicate itself a little bit.
Yeah, and I think maybe I'm a little qualified to speak on this because I am from the metro Atlanta area, and my parents moved from New Jersey to Atlanta in January of 1994, and I was born in March of 1994. And when Atlanta's a very transient city. It has a lot of transplants. And I just think, a lot of people not being from the state, whereas you look at other areas of the state, my Carr's probably family has been in Moultrie or in South Georgia for quite some time. Trayvon Walker, there is a stronger tie to the state of Georgia as a whole, and thus Georgia being the flagship university of the program, I think makes those recruitments a little bit easier, whereas I didn't grow up a Georgia fan. I didn't really start rooting for Georgia until I got in November of 2011. And so I think, that's one of the maybe misconceptions about Georgia compared to some of the other states out there that, why can't Georgia own the state of Georgia in a way, say Ohio State does Ohio or Louisiana does, or LSU does with Louisiana. And that's just not the makeup of the state. And I think this Caleb Downs recruitment is a perfect example of that. His dad's a college coach, moved around a little bit. And so because of them sort of not being lifers in this state, multiple generations of people from this state, there's less of a pull of staying at home and knowing that, hey, you might have to move and go somewhere else. And at the same point in time, he's moved around before, and maybe he likes the idea of trying something new, of putting himself in a more uncomfortable environment to better prepare him for what is coming down the line. Some people really enjoy the comfort of home. Other people in life sometimes search out things that make them uncomfortable to push themselves farther. And if that's what Downs wants to do, I cannot fault him for making that decision.
All right, I have a Janelle Aguero-themed conspiracy theory. Okay. I want to give this to you coming up in a moment. First, let me remind folks, we are on the road assisted by AAA. Connor Riley pinch hitting for Jeff Sintel here today. And obviously, AAA, great to have as you're traveling around this summer. I know I have I actually, unfortunately, had to use my AAA card here this week. Now, not unfortunate that I used it, but unfortunate that I had to use it. But we had a little issue pop up here this week, and very thankful to have that AAA card in my pocket so that we could get all the business kind of taken care of there. That was a really good thing. But But that's not the only thing I want you to think of when it comes to AAA. I want you to think about getting your home insurance through AAA there as well. You can qualifying for their disappearing deductible. How good does that sound? In a day and age in which it seems like new charges are appearing everywhere, how about a deductible that disappears? That means they can reduce your deductible by $50 for every policy year that you go claim free, up to $500. That's just one of the many options offered by AAA. So go to AAA.com/home insurance so you can see them all. You can also give them a call, 833-718-275. It's 833-718-2075. Find a branch near you or check out AAA.com/home insurance for more details. Now, let me also remind you that coverage is subject to all policy terms, conditions, exclusions, and limitations. Discounts and savings opportunities subject to eligibility requirements, subject to underwriting requirements. Insurance underwritten by Member Select Insurance Company and non-affiliated insurance companies. Copyright 2022, The Auto Club Group. All rights reserved. All right, Connor, to finish up here on Janelle Aguero for a moment. This, as I mentioned before, feels like a very of-the-moment recruiting topic because you get the one school, I think Georgia's been perceived to be the leader. You got the other school, Miami, which has kind of come around the bend very quickly, and a lot of other recruits, and it seems like they're working hard to make this close with Aguero here down the stretch. But a fact that you pointed out a moment ago, as a Georgia fan, someone who's an admitted partisan in this discussion, it gives me a little hope. The fact that Aguero is leaving IMG to go back to his home state of Massachusetts for his senior year, to me, that speaks to a guy that likes family, wants to be close to the family for the senior year. Georgia obviously is the kind of program that sells family feel. I think that Miami's selling something a little different. I think they're selling South Beach and excitement and glitz and glamour and just cold hard cash in some respects, which is obviously working for them, and it's worked for them for a number of decades. But Georgia's selling something a little more, I don't know, wholesome than that, I guess. At least that's my perception of this. And if Aguero's going back home for his senior year of high school, I think Jeff Santel's reported he brought a lot of family with him for the Georgia official visit. If this is a family dude, Georgia's a family program, and ultimately that may win out over, whatever John Ruiz is offering from an NIL standpoint. That's my kind of conspiracy theory on why I think that Georgia is probably still in a pretty good place with Janelle Aguero. Are you buying that as kind of a read between the lines scenario for the Aguero recruitment?
Is that what you're telling yourself as the chatter around Aguero in Miami has gotten louder and louder the past week or so?
That is what I'm comforting myself with in relationship to what is, as you said, admittedly kind of a growing conversation around him.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting because, some of these other recruitments that you've seen Miami go out and win, Jaden Rashada was against Florida. Francis Mayuga, the 5-star offensive tackle they landed. Tennessee was thought to be a team really in that. They've yet to go up against a true I guess you could count Raul Aguirre, who committed to them earlier this week over Alabama, but he and Aguirre are not the same level of prospect in my mind. And Georgia's coming off a national championship where they put 15 players in the NFL draft, one of which being a 5-star safety in Lewis Seen, who similarly spent a lot of time in Massachusetts. And so I think, Georgia still, I think, does feel very good about where things stand with Aguero, but in the sort of modern age of recruiting, and really it extends to college football as a whole, the movie scene that sums up the state of college football, you can do it for recruiting, you do it for conference alignment right now, whatever you want to do. It's a scene in The Big Short where Ryan Gosling's character is going in to pitch the Steve Carell-led hedge fund of, hey, I have this great deal on mortgage-backed security swaps that you're going to want to get involved with. And he's, playing up the pitch, and he's like, you smell that? What do you smell? And he's got his assistant there, Chris, who super earnestly just says, opportunity.
Right.
And Ryan Gosling just with the utmost disgust, no, money.
Right.
You smell money. And so I do think that this is a commitment that's going to be interesting. And again, you don't want to extrapolate it to the entire realm of college football, but given this is Georgia, a team that just had a safety drafted in the first round after a very successful 3-year career at the University of Georgia and has shown ability to develop and play really talented safeties. J.R. Reed was a Thorpe finalist. If Richard LeCount doesn't get hurt, I believe he is a Thorpe Award finalist. They've done a really great job at developing safeties. And if this is a recruitment, especially now that Georgia has a need at safety, a legitimate need in my opinion, if this is a recruitment that they can't win where they've been the front runner for a long time, I think that fully establishes we are in a new age of college recruiting where certain schools, Miami maybe being the chief among them, are just saying, hey, we don't care, about prestige or doing this the quote-unquote right way. at the end of the day, the thing that matters most is getting players to your campus, and we're willing to do whatever it takes to do that and become the football program that we need to be. Now, I do think the one thing to watch with Miami is if these results don't come right away, is this something that is a replicable formula over a year-over-year process? But because Miami has not played a game yet, it's sort of a Schrodinger's cat thing of, well, the shine hasn't come off the new car yet. And so, because I think you're seeing something similar with Texas A&M, specifically in this recruiting cycle. They only have 5 commitments right now, one of the lower-ranked Power 5 teams out there, and I think it's because a lot of people, Aggie boosters, as deep-pocketed as they are, they want to see how things translate to the field, because if they're not getting their money investment because they went out and got those players, and the whole Jimbo Fisher saying we didn't do anything illegal. No, you didn't. You played within the rules, and you got players to come and commit to your campus, maybe using NIL, but I can't fault them for that, much like I'm not going to fault Miami for doing the same thing. You have to use whatever advantage you have and do the most of it. And so I think with this Aguero commitment, because of the teams that are matched up against each other, Georgia is sort of the old money vernacular, and Miami is the new money. It's going to be very interesting to sort of see how this Aguero recruitment plays out and what college football in and of itself says about it.
Well, and the comparison I made, because you brought this up on Tuesday, and that was a really good point related to, A&M, the fact they're not quite seeming to have the same level of recruiting momentum for the 2023 class they did for the 2022 class. And kind of, I don't know if you're old enough to remember like when Brady Anderson with the Baltimore Orioles stepped up and had like a 50 home run season kind of out of nowhere, and like those who were naive about steroids at the time were like, wait, this is a little bit weird. What's this guy doing? This is kind of out of nowhere. Like, I sort of feel like in recruiting, as NIL becomes sort of the gas for recruiting, sort of the chemically aided, thing that benefits your recruiting efforts, that we may also from time to time see some Brady Anderson style seasons where, hey, out of nowhere, this team was like top 3, and then the very next year they had a very hard time maintaining that momentum because they just couldn't find the money to do what they had done the previous year. I'm not willing to say that A&M is going to be that as of yet, because I think there's more time left to come. But I do think we're going to see some of that, where if you're recruiting simply on the basis of money, then good luck finding that same amount of money the following year, because it's just not easy to shear the same sheep over and over again like that.
Well, and maybe to give a more current example, think back to like Ole Miss in 2013, 2014.
That's right.
Hugh Freeze was there, and obviously they've had NCAA investigations into there, and there's been at least some knowledge of wrongdoing. But they get Robert Kimdichie, the number 1 player in the country. They get Laramie Tunsil. In 2014, they get Laquan Treadwell. They're getting 5-star players, best players in their position in the country. And that model wasn't sustainable for Ole Miss for a number of reasons. They stopped. The biggest thing is they just sort of stopped winning at the level that they did.
That's right.
And Ole Miss was like, we can't stomach the negativity that Hugh Freeze was bringing in. And Miami, there's talent there, and they could very easily win the ACC Coastal this year. But let's say they go 8-4, a very real scenario, especially because Mario Cristobal, there's talent at Oregon, and they never really, I think, maximize their opportunity there. Justin Herbert's one of the best young quarterbacks in the country, and it seems like Mario Cristobal really had him in handcuffs there. So I'm going to be really interested to see how the on-field product, which is where I think the bigger concerns exist for Mario Cristobal, how that ultimately translates to the field. Because let's say like Texas A&M goes 8-4 this year, I can tell you one thing, they're probably not going to spend the kind of money you need to get the number 1 ranked recruiting class, because they're going to be starting to build the war chest to like, hey, maybe we need to like move on from Jimbo Fisher, because he might not be the guy that delivers Texas A&M their first national championship since the Prohibition era.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something that's going to be interesting to watch. And because Tennessee hasn't played a game yet this year under Josh Heupel, Miami hasn't played a game yet under Cristobal, and Texas A&M hasn't played a game under Fisher, there's still some of the shine there. Lose that first game. Let's say Miami loses to Texas A&M.
Yeah.
They're not talking about, the NIL and all these players they're getting. They're talking about what is going on with Mario Cristobal.
No, I think that's exactly right. Really good stuff. Connor, we'll look forward to reading a lot from you at DawgNation.com. Hopefully getting a chance to maybe chat with you on video tomorrow if we end up getting some good news as Georgia fans as it relates to Troy Bowles, and obviously a lot more fun here. SEC Media Days next week. You're all over that there as well. So, Connor, we'll get a lot of you coming up in the days to come, and we certainly look forward to that.
Yep, as always, was a pleasure, BA.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, good stuff from Connor Riley there on a very interesting landscape. Obviously, Georgia right there in the middle of it when it comes to these recruiting headlines, including tomorrow with 4-star linebacker Troy Bowles getting ready to make his decision. We'll talk more about that in the time to come. For now, though, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And, boy, what a great chance it is to be on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship. Man, so much fun, so many great things going on. whether you want one of those 3 or 4 night sailings that go, to me, the easiest port to get to is probably right there, Port Canaveral, just past Orlando. You can drive there from where I live here in the Atlanta area. Or maybe you say, BA, I want one of the big ships. I want an Oasis class ship. I want 7 night sailing. I think that's a great experience there as well. And listen, a lot of those involve Perfect Day Coco Cay. That's that private island right there in the Bahamas that you've heard me talk about so much. Really an amazing experience. You got the thrill side, you got the chill side, you got the tallest water slide in North America, you've got the freshwater pool, largest in the Bahamas, and it's one of those things that I think is probably sort of a starting point for a lot of folks when they're choosing their Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Which of these ships go to Perfect Day Coco Cay? Now, you enjoy the pool deck and you enjoy all of the onboard entertainment and amenities and all the way to feel fun. I mean, that's one of the things for me is like, I just feel so young when I'm on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship because I'm doing the flow rider, the wave, runner. In some cases you got like the bumper cars on board, you get the water slides, and you're sort of living that sort of fun life and getting the most out of a vacation experience. And that's what I would encourage you to do. Our friends at the Cruise and Vacation Authority can help you with that. You can find them online. Their website, tcava.com. That's tcava.com. You can also give them a call, 770-952-8300. That's 770-952-8300. We would recommend you use a great travel agent to get your Royal Caribbean cruise vacation booked. We think that's what the Cruise and Vacation Authority can do for you. So I want to revisit a topic we discussed when I was on vacation a few weeks ago. We did some pre-recorded shows. One of the things I talked about is that Kirby Smart has been really good at being really hard on UGA rivals. And if you're a Georgia fan, you love this. The way in which, and we can probably bring that down now, but the way in which, whether it be Dan Mullen at Florida, Gus Malzahn at Auburn, Paul Johnson at Georgia Tech, that Kirby Smart has just really kind of beaten up on rivals to the point where they found it very difficult to even hold on to their job. Lots of rival coaches to UGA have been fired here during the Kirby Smart era. And we said, hey, sights set on 2022. Another example of that, guy like Jeff Collins at Georgia Tech, a guy like Brian Harsin there at Auburn. And it just so happens a few weeks after we had said that, here on the show, that when Dennis Dodd, he does this every year, he ranks his coaches in the hot seat for the upcoming season. A couple of the coaches in the hottest seat of all, Brian Harsin there at Auburn, Jeff Collins at Georgia Tech, exactly like we predicted a few weeks ago. And in the case of Harsin, you kind of know the story there. We talk about that quite a bit. But isn't it funny? I mean, like, Georgia Tech is Georgia's in-state rival. Now, some of this is kind of weird in the fact that the college era, these two teams didn't play in 2020. But, I mean, has there ever been a time in which Georgia fans cared less about who the Georgia Tech coach was? It's just amazing. And, Jeff Collins was a guy that, prior to this, I mean, he had some credentials, right? You had some reason to believe he was going to come in and change some of the way in which Tech recruited and become more of a factor in terms of bringing in the kinds of players that at least got Georgia to notice Georgia Tech, if not, outright compete with them. But boy, it has not happened. And on the list of rival coaches that Kirby's kind of gotten fired, I guess by the end of this year, you could at least add one of those names from the list of Collins and Harsin. And if things go really wrong, you could potentially add them both. Now, speaking of Auburn, obviously Brian Harsin is fighting to save his job here this year, but Auburn's also kind of fighting for a degree of relevance in a landscape that's getting more and more challenging by the day. They're already kind of tucked right in between their in-state rival Alabama and their longest tenured rival Georgia, and that's not a very good place to be right now. And then on top of all of that, you're trying to navigate the new NIL landscape. I saw where Alan Green, the Auburn athletic director, put out an official statement. This wasn't from like an interview. This was like a from the desk of type thing coming from Green, shared by the Tigers on social media. The quote here is, for Auburn to remain competitive on the fields and the courts, we need to compete and win in the NIL arena, essentially giving a charge to Auburn boosters to kind of get involved when it comes to NIL. And I do get this. This is real, and every program's got to have their response to it. We saw Kentucky sort of start to try to take a couple more steps of getting involved in NIL. We talked about that last week, and I get Green, saying what he's saying here. But let me tell you where this kind of veers out of bounds for me. And I think you see Lane Kiffin do this a lot. Like every one of these stories where so-and-so gets paid millions of dollars, Lane Kiffin retweets every one of them. Every one of them he retweets. Now, most of us, I think, kind of believe that these like high seven-figure sums that get thrown around, we think those are exaggerations. We think the actual money is a fraction of that, but the big number looks good in the headline. Everybody's got a motivation to sort of tell that tale, and these stories kind of grow because of that. But a guy like Kiffin's always retweeting this. He's always talking about how crazy NIL is, always out there, and he'll do this next week at SEC Media Days. He's always saying, oh, you can't recruit at all if you don't have NIL. Well, it just so happens that Lane Kiffin doesn't have a history of being a very good recruiter. And to me, there is a vantage point from which you can kind of view the things that Lane Kiffin says, where it's almost like he's leaning into what he feels like is a built-in excuse. This year, Mississippi is populating its roster with transfer players. Now, some of that's because they were able to get some very good ones. Guys like Zach Evans and guys like Jackson Dart have a chance to be pretty interesting players potentially in the SEC. But it's also a necessity for a program like Ole Miss because they just don't recruit high school guys very well. Lane Kiffin's never been a great recruiter. Like a lot of sharp offensive minds, you almost get the impression he'd rather draw up plays in the dirt than spend a lot of time calling on high school kids and leaning into, NIL is everywhere, it's the only factor that matters. It just sort of feels like excuse making to me when Lane Kiffin says it, and he says stuff like that all the time. The same thing here for Alan Green. You're not a good athletic director if you're not talking about the reality of NIL and how it's going to impact your program in particular. But here's what I don't want to hear from an Auburn fan. Now, I'm not an Auburn fan, so frankly, I don't really care that much about the Tigers. But if I was to put myself in the position of an Auburn fan, here's what I don't want to hear. When Auburn struggles on the football field this year, or, Bruce Pearl's basketball team or whatever else, if there's some struggles that come, I don't want to hear the reason why we're not winning is because you're not spending enough on NIL. Like, don't blame me for what you're doing. Like, ultimately, the job of creating a winner in college athletics still rests with the coaches on the field, the athletic directors, and the administrators within the athletic facility. Like, the chief responsibility for success still rests with you. And yes, NIL is a part of that, and motivating folks to get involved in NIL is obviously part of the job of an athletic director now, and channeling that towards the appropriate collective and things like that obviously matters. But when a guy like Alan Green says what he says, officially, dropping it from the, social accounts from Auburn, there's a part of this to me that sort of echoes the kind of excuse making I think we hear from guys like Lane Kiffin. So it's a fine line to walk, and it's not an easy needle to thread. But you have to acknowledge the reality of NIL. But when things don't go well in Auburn for a while, at least when it comes to football, things haven't been going very well. I don't want to see fans and boosters being blamed for when that's not the case. The job for making a team good still belongs to the coaches and the athletic directors who hire them. As far as what else is going on in the SEC here for a moment, let me bounce to a couple of other stories here very quick. So we talked the other day about blue chip ratio. It's one of my favorite stories, and it's been that way for a long time. A guy named Bud Elliott from 24/7 Sports, he writes it every single year. And the way in which the blue chip ratio works, you heard me explain this, and you've heard me explain it before, and by now you may be even acquainted with it yourself, that over the course of the previous 4 years, teams that sign more former 4- and 5-star recruits than lesser recruits are the true teams that have the actual true chance of winning a national championship. That if your sort of blue chip number, the percentage of former 4- and 5-star recruits brought in over the previous 4 years, that number's below 50%, you're not going to win a national championship. You're not an actual legitimate national championship contender, and I think that data is well established by now. Now, when we talked about this on the show the other day, we kind of looked at where Georgia is in that category of teams who were above 75%. Georgia at like 77%, just below an Ohio State and Alabama. Alabama at like a staggering 89% on this. And when we looked the other day, we looked at those teams that are at the very high end of that list. But if you look at the rest of the blue chip ratio list, you do see a lot of SEC teams. And it sort of leads me to a couple of, I guess, takeaways from this. Like you see Texas A&M at 70%, LSU's at 66%, Florida's at 66%, or I should say it's 60%, and Auburn above the 50% threshold at 54%. Now, the two takeaways I have from this is, this kind of reminds me a little bit of when Georgia used to be on this list when it was first started being published by Bud Elliott. And, Georgia would be at like, say, 55% or approaching 60% or something like that. And sometimes I would look around and be like, and I actually one time even said this to Bud Elliott when he was on our show years ago. It's like, okay, Georgia's at 59%, but where are these guys? Like, where are the former 5-star recruits? Because when you looked at offensive line, you didn't often see them there. Sometimes when you looked at quarterback, you didn't see him there. Sometimes when you looked at certain position groups, you had a hard time saying, okay, well, more than half this roster are former elite recruits. But when I look at actually who's on the 2 deep, sometimes I'm left to wonder, where are these former 4 and 5-star guys? And if you're an Auburn fan or a Florida fan, I think to a degree, you probably kind of feel that same way. Like Florida's going to lean pretty heavily on a Louisiana Lafayette transfer at running back this year. And, Auburn's got, all kinds of roster holes seemingly. So I don't know that the blue chip number necessarily, gives all the fan bases comfort who find themselves there, because I think when you sort of speak to what you're actually seeing on the field, sometimes the actual players on the field kind of belie what the recruiting rankings suggest you're supposed to have in some respects. But in addition to that, I also kind of conclude this, which is that all of these teams, A&M, LSU, Florida, and Auburn, all of these teams, at least to a degree, have a little bit of mystery at quarterback. Now, Florida's the one team that essentially has a named starter, being Anthony Richardson, and there's a chance that Richardson's actually pretty good. But the point here is, like, if Auburn were to figure out a quarterback between a Zach Calzada or a TJ Finley, or even, I guess, Robbie Ashford having a chance, maybe slightly there, like, it's not impossible to say they could be better than expectations if they add quarterback to a roster that has 54% former 4 and 5-star recruits. If Anthony Richardson is as good as some of these Florida fans hope they are, then yeah, for Florida, who plays very swingish, winnable games against Kentucky early, Utah early, LSU early, there's a chance that Florida is somewhat of a surprise team if you pair a good season from AR to go along with what you got here with the rest of this roster. We told you before, they do have some talent left on defense. Guys like Brenton Cox and Javon Dexter, they got some talent there that if the quarterback position really is figured out, then maybe Florida is slightly better than expected. Same thing for LSU. I don't particularly like what they have at quarterback. I think there's a reason Jaden Daniels is transferring. I think, just after getting off to a nice start with his college career at Arizona State, he sort of turned into kind of an average player. I think Miles Brennan's had a million chances to win the LSU starting job, even apart from injuries, never done it. So I don't know that LSU has a quarterback, but if it does, to go along with a roster where 2 out of every 3 players on the team is a former 4 or 5-star recruit, that's a chance to be better than expected. And that's certainly the case for Texas A&M, who really is, very talented almost everywhere, but the offensive positions that matter. Zach Calzada last year played great against Alabama, but never really played well against anybody else. And they haven't had great high-level quarterback play at any point in time during the Jimbo era. So if a Max Johnson transferring in or a Haynes King finally being healthy, if one of those 2 guys is a quarterback, then that does sort of speak to A&M's chances of being more than just second-best team in the SEC West, kind of far removed from the conversation with Alabama. So it's at least worth considering that. Also, very quickly, I remind you, SEC Media Days do begin on Monday, and DawgNation going to be all over that. We'll be in Atlanta. I am going to do the show most days probably from our studio, just because it's just way easier to do that way. Is there a chance we do at least one show from the College Football Hall of Fame, or at least right outside there? Probably will be. Connor, Mike, they're going to be running around the entire time. So we're going to have wall-to-wall coverage, but I'm going to try to keep our show as normal as possible just because it runs so much more smoothly that way. So what I'll probably be doing is in studio for the show, popping over to the CFB, HOF after that, and obviously all kinds of surprises throughout the week, popping on video, things like that. So we're going to have a lot of cool stuff, but that does get going on Monday, and then the Georgia Bulldogs Day shows up there on Wednesday. So a lot going on with that. We'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. All right, now, here on our program today, DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, I want to tell you about something really cool we're starting today for the very first time. And this is going to be kind of like in future weeks. This should kind of be a fun way to close out the week. We're going to have some kind of fun content, hopefully kind of funny, hopefully sort of lighthearted. Just always kind of nice to close out the week on kind of a happy note here. We do that with our golden shoes every day. And this particular finish to the week, we're going to do that here on Fridays. We're going to call it the Big Finish, presented by the Finish Long Drink. Now, here's what else this is going to include. So many of you are always so nice to share with me the fact that you're enjoying the Finish Long Drink. And actually, one of my favorite success stories for our show over the course of the last year is how many folks we've introduced to the Finish Long Drink. It's just gone really, really well. And so many of you have stood up and said, hey, BA, you told me about it. I tried it. I've enjoyed it. And I just love the interactions that a lot of us have had with one of our great sponsors, the Finish Long Drink. So when we do the Big Finish here each week on Friday, presented by the Finish Long Drink, I'm also going to invite you to kind of share with me your own enjoyment of the Finish Long Drink and we'll highlight you, whatever you're doing, grilling out, playing golf, at the pool, at the beach, whatever else, your finished long drink, having a good time, we will highlight that here when we do. In fact, let me show you a few of these right now as kind of an example of what we're looking for here when it comes to the finished long drink and the big finish. Folks who are in the past have kind of shared with me some great love of the finished long drink, and I'm happy to see that. So let me shout out a couple folks here, including Jesse Smith, who at the kickoff of last season, how about this refrigerator full of finished long drink? Got some long drink strong, you got some long drink traditional with the grapefruit flavor, the long drink cranberry. He says stocked up and ready for the Georgia-Clemson game, and guess what? Georgia went on to win that game. That's the power of the finished long drink right there. Jesse Smith sharing that and having a really good time there on that. The Bulldog Outsider, not to be outdone, said he found some finished long drink in the Mojave Desert there in California. So folks finding the finished long drink all over the place and connecting with that, having a really good time. Appreciate that. Oren Chile told me also back in September that finished long drink still undefeated. That's how much he's enjoying that and having a good time doing so. Oren, I'm certainly happy to hear that. And Gene Horan Jr. Back in October said one of these days that he was going to enjoy a finished long drink with me, that he really enjoys the podcast. First of all, Gene, that's an incredibly nice thing for you to say. I really appreciate that. And one of these days, maybe we can toast a finished long drink together. I certainly appreciate you enjoying that and, of course, sharing with folks about the finished long drink there as well. So that's kind of what we're going to do here. We'll have some content. We'll have some fun. We'll have a big finish to the week each and every week, courtesy of our friends at the Finished Long Drink. So my invitation to you is hit me up on Twitter at DawgNation Daily. I'll invite you to be a part of it when we do it again next week. And, of course, as we always do here in style with some golden shoes here to close out on a Friday. We've got a few of these, so we'll kind of bounce through them right here. Let me put the first one up on the screen and give credit to where it's due. How about everybody, Seth Rhodes? This is so funny. So there was the thing that, like, the galaxies that got shared on social media here this week. I think, Neil deGrasse Tyson, I guess, had this. It's probably more than I can completely understand. But what Seth writes is that Andy Hooper, one of his friends at Ray Fingers on Twitter, found proof of intelligent life in the James Webb Telescope picture. And so you zoom in here on this and you see Kirby Smart laughing about 33-18. That's really good from Seth Rhodes. Well done and good job there by Andy Hooper, who I guess is the architect of the edit there. So well done by Seth Rhodes there on that. How about Brian Whitehead, who shared this with me from our buddy Wise Dog? He says it's a new sideline bench for Alabama's injured wide receivers. It's an Alabama couch. That's really funny from both Wise Dog, and I appreciate Brian Whitehead sharing that with me. We have another one, I think, too. Yeah, Bill Sanders says, here are things that adults shouldn't believe in anymore. Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, the Easter Bunny. Of course, kids obviously believe in those things, but when you get to be an adult, you sort of save that for the kids. And also the Florida Gators there as well. Yeah, nobody believing in the Gators anymore, although unlike the other three, the Gators and success, that truly isn't real. And Gatorade updated about 4,936 days from that's how long it's been since Florida's won a national championship. And that's not good news. And here's what's worse news. They got another beatdown coming at the hands of the Georgia Bulldogs 106 days from right now. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. Hope all of you have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday as SEC Media Days gets going. DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. We will look forward to talking to you then. All right, I told Connor Riley before our show began, we're going to try to keep this one short. It's 11:17, so there you go. There you go. We'll try again next time there on that. But we'll take a few comments, though, and hope you're having a great week and closing out for a great weekend and getting ready for cool stuff. Watching out for Troy Bowles tomorrow. Spoiler alert, if that's good news, we'll probably stop by and do a video. If it's bad news, we'll pretend like it never happened. So that's kind of where we're going there on that. Let's see what else. Daddy's channel says, why are these Bama fans on this chat like they're about ready to jump ship? Them dogs have hunted you down once. Dogs on top. Yeah, it is kind of funny. You definitely see a lot of Bama flair in here from time to time. For sure. Raphael Wright in here going at our buddy G. Grace. There you go. Jake Shipes in here as always. Foster Moss says, wouldn't it be cool if Texas A&M and Miami both go 8-4 and they play each other in a bowl game called the Cash App Bowl? Yeah, that actually would be kind of funny. And, I mean, I do think, there's just not as straight a line as one might often think between money and winning. Now, obviously, it's helpful to have money in professional sports too, but like look at the teams who are the biggest spenders in NFL free agency. Now, this is not an apples to apples comparison. I totally get this, but the teams that spend biggest on big splash free agents, these are losing franchises. There's no bigger loser mentality than trying to spend a huge sum of money on the kind of player that you weren't good enough to evaluate when he was young, healthy, and capable. Like by the time he's, on that free agent contract, all of a sudden now you feel like that you're going to like money whip the world and shortcut yourself to greatness. Do you know how many NFL teams have tried that? And it just doesn't work that well. Like the teams that spend the biggest and make the biggest splashes in free agency, these are not the winning franchises. That's not what the very best organizations do. It's just not. And another comparison I was thinking of is this. We got the Major League Baseball draft like now, basically, right? I mean, it's happening within the next, day or two? It's coming up very, very soon. Sometimes I'm not always great with dates, but we're right here on it. Now think about this. These are often cases, 18-year-old type players that get drafted. Like how many of them go on to great success in Major League Baseball? Like that's the thing is like if you're an A&M or a Miami that in some cases is betting big on unproven commodities very young, good luck with that. Good luck with that because there has to be a little bit of a built-in hedge with that of, hey, I'm betting big on something that I don't know what the outcome's going to be. There's a 50% chance of all of this working out for me. And I think the baseball draft is a little bit of a reminder of that. It's like, a lot of young guys, and there's a reason teams take them, in the first round, but there's also a reason that once they get drafted in the first round, we never hear from some of them ever again. That's just kind of the way that goes. And listen, getting talent, getting 4- and 5-star guys, that's still the name of the game. It's still the name of the game. But some of this is not going to be as 2 + 2 = 4 as some of the fans of Miami, Texas A&M, or the boosters that are maybe supplied some of this money. It's not going to be quite as much of a straight line as you might think. At least I don't think so. Frank Patterson says the blue chip ratio isn't really all that important when UGA won the national title and beat the Shriners, that's the East-West Shrine team, that what Frank calls Alabama, on national television with a freshman 3-star wide receivers and walking at quarterback. So in defense of Bud Elliott on this, Frank, in the piece, he actually addresses this. He says that like the blue chip ratio is not necessarily supposed to be used to pick games. Now, there are other people who've done different research in the past that have said something to the effect of, and I'm kind of probably not stating this completely accurately, but it's something to the effect of that when a team with more recruiting talent plays a lesser team, the more recruiting talent team beats the lesser team like 2 out of every 3 times. That there is a little bit of a of a usage for the more talented team in terms of predicting who's going to win games. That's kind of already baked into the point spread most of the time anyway. But in Elliott's case, he writes the blue chip ratio. Like the one thing he does make explicitly clear is the ratio itself should not be used to pick games. In other words, Alabama having a slightly higher blue chip ratio than Georgia does not make it slightly more likely that Alabama will win. That what it's really about is kind of entering into the crossing the threshold of being in the kind of club that could win. In other words, if you're 40%, Bud Elliott says you can't win. If you're above 50%, Bud Elliott says you can win. Now, it just so happens that in recent years we've had teams like Georgia and Alabama who've been at like 80% who've been winning. But in both of Clemson's national championship years, they were somewhere right around 60. When LSU won in 2019, they were below 70. So the absolute most talented team hasn't always won the national championship, and Bud Elliott doesn't use the blue chip ratio that way. For him, it's all about being above the 50% threshold as being able to do it. Now, my sort of hypothesized theory is that if the number used to be 50, I do believe that sort of Mendoza line has probably gone up since then. I believe it actually may be a little closer to 60 now. But in Bud's case, he would certainly not tell you that, hey, if this team's at 77 and this team's at 70, the team at 77 has a greater chance of winning the national championship. I don't think that's the way it's intended to be used. Let's see what else. Worm talking up Jamari Salyer for what he did against Will Anderson. Obviously, Salyer's insertion into the national championship game was a big reason why Georgia won that game. Jonathan Aaron says, let's just face the facts. The boosters are not going to give any money to Harsin for NIL. That they've already given him enough in their eyes. They want him gone. I mean, I think that's true. And, I'm not willing to stipulate anything that's ever happened in the past in college football. But, boy, there's also a version of this that seems to have also existed in the past where, when coaches get in trouble in the past, it seems like when there's a swing recruit that could have maybe gone their way, a lot of times that has not gone down. A lot of times that sort of in trouble coach or that wore out his welcome coach, they're just not getting those swing recruits late in the process. Just amazing. And there would be an interpretation of that, especially if you're a cynically minded person and someone that believes, there was tons of under the table payments going on, which I'm not willing to stipulate there was. But if you're the kind of person that would have believed that, I do think you see lots of examples in the past of, for coach who the boosters are kind of tired of, boy, it certainly seems like when that coach really needs to sort of win that final leg of a recruiting battle, boy, it always seems like it doesn't quite go his way on that. That's an interesting thing to go back and think of. And the modern version of that is probably the fact that, hey, if the boosters don't like Brian Harsin to begin with, then no, they're not ponying up NIL money to help him do better because they don't want him. They want to be right in saying that Auburn should have never hired him. And then the next coach, they may shower him with NIL because Auburn's obviously got a few rich boosters. They may shower that next dude with NIL, but they ain't giving nothing to Harsin because they didn't want Harsin to begin with. That's probably true. Probably true. Let's see what else. Green Soldier on the subject of Keely Ringo taking an easy pick to the house. Yeah, the one thing I can't do. Here's one thing I can't do is, if you're an Alabama fan, you want to tell me Will Anderson's a great player. I agree with you. Will Anderson's a terrific player. If you want to tell me that Bryce Young, is a outstanding quarterback, I agree with you on that. If you want to tell me that Alabama is a very dangerous threat to Georgia this upcoming season, the kind of team that in a postseason scenario that Georgia's going to be in a knockdown dragout with, I'll be happy to listen to you on that. And I totally give you that. Got great respect for what they bring to the table. You've heard me talking up Dallas Turner. You've heard me talking up guys on the Alabama roster here this year. I got great respect for all of that. But here's what I'm not going to do. I am not going to listen to any kind of equivocating with the national championship game itself, because it happened. We all saw it. And Alabama got dragged all over Indianapolis. That's the one thing I can't do. I can't go back and relitigate a game that we all saw took place with our own eyes. So if we want to talk about what's going to happen this year, you may be right. If you're talking big about Bama, you may be proven right on that. But you can't go back and woulda, coulda, shoulda your way into last year's national championship game. That is just not that's just a non-starter for me. It just is. So Ringo did what he did. Georgia did what it did. Keely, A.D. Mitchell touchdown, Brock Bowers touchdown, Stetson's big throws in the fourth quarter. All of this happened. We all saw it. And you just got to take the L. And listen, maybe it gives you more motivation to come back and get the W this year. But in 2021, you took the L. And it's as simple as that. Foster Moss says, it's no excuse for the Dogs not to lead the nation in red zone offense this season. Yeah, when you got those kinds of tight ends, I do think they're incredibly I think that may be what you're meaning by that. Just really valuable as red zone targets. And Todd Hartley's done a great job of collecting them. And Todd Monken, I think, has done a really good job of deploying them. And, guys like catching touchdowns. And these guys are going to have a great opportunity to catch a lot of touchdowns. They really are. And like I'm not an X's and O's expert. I don't pretend to be one. But this is one of the things I do feel like I've kind of learned more about football in recent years is that it really is harder to score the closer you get to the end zone. That when you take the concern of defensive backs having to worry about what's happening over their head, when you take that away, I think you make the job of the defense just a little bit easier. And really smart coaches thrive in the red zone. I used to think the red zone was kind of like this sort of made-up idea that why is it the 20-yard line, why isn't it the 15, or why isn't it the 25? Like how we decide that the 20-yard line is where the red zone begins. It's sort of a made-up idea. But wherever you think the actual red zone begins, the red zone is a real thing. It is a scoring area in which only the best thrive and the rest settle for field goals. And, being great and finishing off drives, turning scoring opportunities into actual scores, it's a big part of football. And it's one of those things I've probably grown to appreciate more recently than maybe I would have even years ago. To Neil, good to have you back in the Peach State. Hope you're having a good time doing all that. David Gross mentioning my theory about Alabama being too frail. Listen, I mean, and as you point out, Georgia's got some smaller guys who've, in some cases, had a little bit of hard time, maybe staying healthy in their own right. And I think the thing you hope for Georgia is that, hey, you're spreading the wealth around enough that you're not all that dependent on any one player. And you also think about, well, what if that player who's been hurt has a chance to stay healthy this year? That's where we kind of get into some of the top-end projection stuff we talked about earlier this week. But clearly Alabama has become quite comfortable in building a lot of its program around guys who are like, starting running back, 5'11", 200 pounds. That's small. And I think that Jahmyr Gibbs is a terrific player. Boy, that's a lot different than what Derrick Henry was in 2015. And you just see lots of examples of that. All right, let me get some Facebook and some DawgNation.com. We're going to go for today. And hope you're having big weekend plans and getting ready for fun and doing stuff like that. All right, on Facebook. Sandy Price says, we need Coach Spurrier at SEC Media Days next week as an analyst just so we can stir the pot. Yeah, I get where you're coming from. Spurrier was always really entertaining at SEC Media Days. I hope I'm not disappointed, but I actually have relatively high hopes that it's a good media days next week. I think a lot of the coaches are facing interesting enough questions that I'm actually somewhat hopeful that it's a pretty good show. Randy Hall checking in to say, go Dogs from Buford. No doubt excited about Justice Haynes' upcoming senior season there for the Wolves. Matt Rugavina says, become a finesse team, live and die by wide receiver positions. That it is what it is, and I think that Matt's probably right about that. Chris Free says, I hope Andrew Jones' son goes to college, then go to the Major League Baseball. I guess there's a chance he's going to be the number one overall pick, right? And I've seen footage of him. When he swings the bat, man, he looks just like Andrew. He really does. I don't know, like, his actual physique, or I don't really know what he looks like in street clothes. But when he swings the bat, when he really extends on it, woo, boy, that is something to see, man. He's got a beautiful swing. Beautiful swing. Lynn Johnson Shipman says, that's right, BA, Dogs won, no excuses, Bama. There you go. Bill Sanders also having some fun with that there as well. By the way, good to see Steve Shaffini in the comment section. It's another one of these comments that gets hidden. So, Connor, I don't know why this is, but every now and then there's like a Facebook comment that's just hidden, and I don't think any of us are hiding it. I don't even know how to hide a comment. But every now and then one of these comments gets hidden. But nonetheless, Steve Shaffini in the comment section. Good to see him here today. What else is going on? Marshall Fleming, good to have him here. Steve Shaffini also pointing out the Braves took Mike Minor over Mike Trout. Yeah. There's a lot of those stories over the years that are not great. Not great. Let's see what else. Yeah, Aisha Murphy checking in here. Always good to see Aisha. Kent Holcomb, yeah, we can see you in here. I can see you. You put in a test post earlier. I can see you. You haven't been shadow banned. I can see you. Alan McGovern says, take the Lizards, going back to Florida, and the blue chip. They're at 60%. They don't have a chance in hell of taking the trophy. Yes, kind of what we talked about before. It's like, I remember when Georgia was kind of around that number, sometimes I was left to wonder, where are these guys? Like, if more than half this roster is former 4- and 5-star recruits, why aren't I seeing them? Why am I not seeing them in key position groups, like offensive line, or somewhere like that? And I think that Florida deals with some of that. But, I mean, it is also a reminder, like, we've told you before that while I don't think Florida's going to be very good this year, it's also not impossible to think that they could be undefeated playing Georgia. I mean, they are coming into the Georgia game. I mean, the schedule gets a little bit tougher for them after that. dogs, A&M, whatnot. But coming into the game against Georgia, a lot of coin flip games against the likes of, LSU and certainly Kentucky and even Utah to a degree because it's a home game for Florida. Those games could all go, any way. The one game they're probably a true surefire underdog is the game against Tennessee, but over the course of years, Florida's also done pretty well against Tennessee too. So I'm like you. Clearly, Florida's not good, and I don't believe that Florida's a championship contender at all. But, you put quarterback with a roster that still has some talent, especially defensive front seven type stuff. You put that together, it has the potential to add up to something. Has the potential to, anyway. All right, DawgNation.com for a few comments, and then we're out of here. Hemingway says, no doubt concerning the difficulty of getting 7 in the red zone, which may be why Monken and Kirby use the offensive scheme that, take shots. Yeah, I mean, as crazy as it sounds, sometimes taking a shot from 40 yards is a little easier than trying to thread the needle from 20 yards. I think sometimes that's probably true. I mean, those of you that play golf know this. Like, the worst thing in the world is to be in between clubs. Like, sometimes a 50-yard shot, you'd rather have 150 to the green than 50 to the green. And the red zone, I think, sometimes kind of works the same way. Dan in Arkansas says Florida will be 3-4 going to Jacksonville. You may be very well right. I'm not willing to make that prediction one way or another. But I do. I mean, I don't think LSU is very good. So, the notion that LSU is definitely going to beat Florida, I don't know that I would say that right now. Same for I think that Kentucky's probably better than Florida, but I think it's a tough road. I mean, that's one of the tougher road games for Kentucky here this year. Utah is a threat to win the Pac-12, but traveling 3,000 miles or 2,500 miles to go play in Gainesville in the heat, humidity, I don't know that that's a given there. So I don't think Florida's very good, but I do think the schedule sets up in kind of an interesting fashion for them where they have a lot of coin flip games that could go one way or the other. Now, the idea of winning a big stretch of coin flip games, that's not going to be the most, likely prediction either, but it's an interesting beginning of the season for Florida, I believe. Dragon Z42 says, loving the show after moving back from Texas. Well, Dragon Z, glad to have you here today. Appreciate that. Score Check agrees with Dan in Arkansas on the Florida record, and he may turn out to be right about that. All right, final comments. We got to go because it has gotten late fast. G. Gray Spammer Boy, he's always in here getting it stirred up, man. Always in here getting it stirred up. You love to see it. On Facebook for the last time. Anybody else before we go? Yeah, good stuff here today. So I'm going to let it end with that for right now. Y'all have a great weekend. Maybe we'll see you tomorrow on video. If Georgia gets some good news with Troy Bowles, we'll definitely see you back here on Monday. I will do the show from studio on Monday, and then we'll kind of figure out the rest of SEC Media Days after that. But since it's in Atlanta, if I can keep it somewhat normal, the show just sort of functions better when you're kind of in the studio. So I think we'll try to do that as much as we possibly can. Also, we're going to do a fun thing starting with Kroger next week, which I'm really excited about. And don't forget to be a part of our Big Finish presented by the Finish Long Drink each and every Friday. We'll share that with you. So if you're enjoying some Finish Long Drink, let us know about it, and we'll broadcast that message out to the entire world. So hope you're all doing great. Have a great weekend. Also, check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, AJC.com. Braves in Washington. Also getting ready for the All-Star break. Sort of hoping that at some point in time, Austin Riley might get a late call and get called up there for that. Also kind of a serious thing in the paper coming up this weekend. Obviously, everybody knows crime's kind of up, and unfortunately, the homicide numbers are up in Atlanta there as well. And AJC taking a little bit of a deep dive at what's going on with that and kind of what you do about that. It's a serious topic. It's the kind of thing we don't really get into on this show, but obviously Atlanta Journal-Constitution sort of exists to cover that kind of news, and they've gotten that for you there this weekend. So you might be interested in reading that, ajc.com, for more details. Also, big thanks to our friends at R.S. Andrews for making it all possible here in the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. And stay cool here this weekend, this summer. Get that air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. R.S. Andrews will help you out with that, and it only costs $99. So make sure you find them out today. They're online at rsandrews.com. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here Monday. Dog Nation Daily, presented by Kroger. We'll look forward to talking to you then.